Seatbelts fastened, coffee topped up, tray table stowed, because today you're riding shotgun in the Inibuilds A350. We're flying a full commercial sector from Dubai to Bahrain as Emirates Flight 839, using real SOPs, live weather and actual charts. No shortcuts, no YouTube voodoo. I'm James. I'm a captain and an instructor on both the A350 and the A380. And yes, despite the rumours, we do still fly the thing now and again. This is as close to the real thing as you can get, without actually having to wake up at 4 AM and wear polyester. Let's get into it. So, the batteries are off. All the way back here. Checking for 25.5 volts minimum. And if you had turned them off, you would go this way. But because we're turning them on, they'll go this way. External powers, always external power 2 first. And then number 1. Turn the IRs on. Alright, and she is alive. What do we do now here? Set the lights as you wish. Obviously it's daylight, so we don't need the integrated lights on. Everything else can stay off. There's no difference. Sim brief import. A5900 839 Dubai to Bahrain. So we're checking the database 350-900 performance pack. Correct engines, the performance factor you would compare with the flight plan, so that one is correct. Active database is good. And on the init page, you can request a flight plan. That's received. Insert it. Check this. Open up the charts. Because what we're looking for here is the departure from here. Standard departure point from Dubai runway 12 right is kilo 5. All right, so now that you've set up your charts, you'd come across here, check the ANF database by going to plan here and zoom on here. That brings up the ANF. Once it loads, we can go here, check the status, and make sure that that's in date, which it is. The next step is going to be ECAM status aircraft technical check. So we're going to press and hold this guy and make sure nothing comes up here. That's good. And then you would have a look for OEBs and aircraft differences. If you happen to be a sort of pilot who flies A350 and A380 like I am, we would brief between us at this point the differences between the 350 and the 380 just as a reminder. Then we'd check the OEBs. There's 2 active OEBs at the moment on the A350. First of all is that the outer ring here should stay in 100s. There's a fault in the FCU at the moment in the altitude knob where if you select, say, an altitude, maybe it hasn't quite latched properly, and during turbulence and general flight-related vibrations, it can flick up to the next one. So you leave it on 100s, and then at worst, you're going to be out by 100 feet, whereas if you leave it on the outer ring, you could maybe be out by 1,000 feet. So one OEB is that we leave that in 100s. So when you get cleared to an altitude, you set it over here, so say you're cleared to 4,000 feet, and then put it back again and leave it in the 100s detent. The other one, if I can find my overhead, is related to cabin pressure. So it says that any unexpected or unusual erratic behavior of the cabin pressure system, you switch either of these from auto to manual by pressing this button and then putting it back again. And what that does is change from, say, for example, cabin pressure control system 1 to cabin pressure control system 2. That should fix your issue. Normally you'd find the tech log floating around the flight deck somewhere. Have a look. Well, it's disappeared. This is interesting. So you see how this is really dirty? This is incredibly accurate because what happens is that these landing gear pins, the CM2, when you come into the flight deck, one of their first jobs is to check that we have all 5 landing gear pins. And what these are used for are to lock out the gear if the engineers are towing the aircraft. Usually, instead of these ropes, they have a really long red and white streamer on them. And as they're flapping around the landing gear, they get very, very, very dirty. And they're a lot thicker than this. So in order to be able to see all 5 gear pins, there's another one down here, you actually have to move those streamers, and they are very, very, very dirty. So that will be what's going on here. It's a very nice touch there, addition by the Inibuilds team. So now that we've checked the tech log, which was found somewhere, and then we would input any MEL items into here. So you'd come in here, go into your manuals, which is on the ops library, which for some reason is not enabled here. You go into there, input any MEL items. What's going on with this? It's weird. Input any MEL items into your TOPA, takeoff performance application. And then your takeoff performance application would be correct as per the actual status of the aeroplane. But today our aeroplane is fully serviceable, which is nice. So then CM2 would do a fire test, which involves pressing and holding this button. What's going to happen is that this is going to light up, this is going to light up, this is going to light up, as are all of the agent and discharge lights. Then you'll get a continuous repetitive chime, and there'll be an ECAM, which I'll show you. So press and hold, that comes on, and that's the bell. And you notice in the bottom of the screen there, you see the main landing gear bay fire is also lit up. So if I come down here, show you what else it does. All right, so if I press the fire test, see here that we get the ECAMs that come up with it. So engine 1 fire, engine 2 APU, main landing gear bay fire, and that should be able to be cancelled. All right, so I'll turn that fire test off. Okay, so at this point you would start the APU. You can save fuel by delaying the APU start. So you'd come on here, say, what's the temperature in the cabin? It says currently it's 38 degrees. This is the cockpit, this is the front, and this is the back. So you definitely want some air conditioning. And normally it's provided by the ground. And there's a limitation on the A350 that if there is ground air conditioning connected, you cannot use the APU bleed air. So at this point now we'd be getting in touch with the engineers and say clearly the ground air conditioning is not sufficient in these temperatures, and I'd like you to disconnect it. So then we would come up here, start the APU. There's no limitation on the A350 of having to wait 5 seconds between pushing the master switch and the start switch, as there is on the A380. APU takes about 1 minute and 15 seconds to boot up in real life. So once that's on, then we'll start the APU bleed. In the meantime, we can be preparing for the next stage of our cockpit preparation, which is going to be the takeoff performance. So in order to do the takeoff performance, get rid of that, we're going to need the weather. Now, we go to ATC.com, to Digital ATIS. This is Dubai departure. Normally you would press this, but appears to be not working. So I shall overlay the weather on the screen from my phone. This is the weather at the moment, and that's what we'll use. I don't know why I can put those on auto update and that not. Unusual. And what that's done is automatically populated Dubai, Bahrain, and Dammam from this page here. Dubai, Bahrain, Dammam. All right, so if we look up here, the APU is now showing as available. So we'll have a look up. And now, while the APU is on, it will automatically take over the power from external power 1. So the external power 1 is shown up here, and that's automatically disconnected to be replaced by the APU generator. So the first thing you do once you've got the APU on is that you should switch off external power 1 because it's not being used anyway. We'll use external power 2 on because having that power coming in from the ground puts less of a load on the APU and will burn less fuel. So now the APU bleed is on. That will power the packs. What are you whining about? That will power the packs, and then you can hear there in the background the air is coming in. And there you go, we've got some pack 1 and 2 showing air coming in, and that will hopefully cool down, because it's not a very pleasant place to be in a very hot flight deck, especially with such big windows in the sunshine. You can actually close these in real life. Oh, look at that. Inibuilds, you guys are brilliant. So this is actually how it would look. There's one at the back here as well. It should be noted, this gap here, on the A380 there's a flap which comes down and partially closes this gap. This gap here is my absolute nemesis on the 350 in that you can't close it, and sometimes you'll do an entire flight with the sun sitting just here in your eyes, and it's really quite unpleasant. Airbus, please fix that. Okay, so takeoff performance. Got our APU on, we've got the weather, we've got the weight. Usually the ground crew or ground controllers would send us some information at this point to be able to calculate our takeoff performance. But I'm going to use 0707 knots. It's going to be obviously fine. And where you want to, right. And for some reason you can't select an intersection. Hold on, excuse me, dog is barking. Okay. Clearly something I've pressed. Keep selecting flaps 1. I will work out what that is, but I think it's while I'm typing in here. And that weather we were using was 39 degrees now. NH is 1004. It's definitely dry. And let's have a look on here. So we need 10.7 tons of fuel, 140 tons of zero fuel weight, so we'd be about 150.7 at takeoff. Now, we like using round numbers, so let's use 151. And config, is there an auto selection? There is not. It's a shame. Air conditioning on, flex thrust. It's a shame we can't choose an intersection. And then we can just press compute and we'll use those numbers. That'll make sense. Alright, okay, so now we've done the takeoff performance. So I would do it on my side. First officer would do the same thing on their side, and there'd be a procedure where he or she would read the numbers, I would check from my side, and if they match, then hopefully we've done the right thing and our performance figures are valid. Now I'm not sure which button I keep pressing that keeps selecting flaps 1. Away. Alright, so now the first officer would, or sorry, the pilot monitoring would prepare for the walk around. So, they need to check a few things before they go out on the walk around. So they would check the hydraulics within the normal filling range. So this is the normal filling range. If this isn't here, and you've just got like X's, then it means you've forgotten to switch on your IRSs. Just below is apparently normal when the cargo doors are open. So let's have a look. Doors. Well, the cargo doors are not open. So this is something you'd speak to the engineers about and say, hey guys, you know, can you add some hydraulic fluid? Now, just because it says green, it's not actually green fluid. It's just a name for the system. That is the green system. So normally that should be within this filling range, which changes with temperature. They should also check the oxygen. Now, if you just clear that, the default screen here has oxygen. It should be 750 psi on each side if there's only one pilot, or 1050 psi if there's anybody on the jump seat on this side. Regulator pressure low just means that this is off. So if I switch that on, hopefully that should go away. The last thing is to check the amount of engine oil. Now on the 350 you need a minimum of 13 quarts of oil, and you can't see it because the FADECs are turned off. So if you look up and go all the way to the back, you see there's FADEC ground power. Turn those on. Wait a few seconds as the FADECs boot up. Eventually it will tell you how much oil is in each engine. That's a lot. So definitely more than enough. We need a minimum of 13 quarts. There isn't a maximum because it would overflow. And then you can turn those off because you're not using them anymore. Right. So then you would check the park brake is on. So not just the handle, but this indication here at the bottom of the PFD means the park brake is on. Check, apparently I'm extending the spoilers as well. I'm not sure what I'm doing there. Spoilers, flaps. And then if it was nighttime, you'd want the lights to be on, but we leave our nav lights on all the time anyway, because they're part of the walk-around check to make sure that they're working. So then while the CM2 is out, sorry, the pilot monitoring is out doing the walk-around, pilot flying will start the cockpit setup with the overhead panel. So we've just switched on the crew supply. The other button up here is the recorder ground control so that the cockpit voice recorder can record while we're doing the cockpit setup. Otherwise it will start recording once the engines are started. I'm all the way up, make sure everything is in its usual position. These are all resets, make sure that they're in. Come to the lights panel. The beacon should be off at this point. The strobe, auto, nav light stays on system 1. Logo can go on or off, but on or off, but it's daylight, nobody would see it, therefore I can leave that on auto. Off. Emergency exit lights should be armed before any passengers board, and seatbelt sign would go on once you have finished refueling, which we have. So 10.7 tons is correct, so I can put the seatbelt sign on. Okay, only 6 fuel pumps on the 350, so this is significantly less time than the A380. Go all the way to the back, make sure that there's no white lights. At this point, the engineers might be doing maintenance on the system, so that they might have the remote CB control on. That's so that they can open and close circuit breakers from this computer here, which is the maintenance control panel, or the onboard maintenance terminal, to use its proper name. But there's no engineer at the moment. All right, so no white lights. And then the third column, making sure that there's no white lights. This is your cargo air conditioning. So that would come on the NOTOC. There'd be information as to whether there is any cargo that requires heating or cooling. So the forward cargo hold positions beginning with a 1 or a 2 are this guy here. Nothing in today, so I'd leave that off because it saves fuel. In the back, this is just a heater. So if you leave it as cold as possible, then the heater will not engage. If you've got medicines, food stuff, then there might be a temperature requirement. The most important then is if we're carrying any animals in the hold, then obviously you'd want them to not freeze during your flight. Lastly, come up here, test the CVR just by pressing it for a couple of seconds and making sure that no error messages come up. This is completed later on by both pilots. You'd come here, make sure that these are in the correct position. Anti-skid nose wheel steering stays on. Just the one ISIS on these aeroplanes. The customer configuration may be different. Making sure that you haven't accidentally extended the speed brakes or flaps again. Come back, make sure that all the positions are in the right place. All right, let me go back to my FMS picture. So we start surveillance page, making sure that stuff is where it should be. Now, if I press default settings now, it will switch it all on, but the transponder doesn't need to be on. I'll show you what that does. Which is everything should be green. Your transponder code will come with the clearance, but I'm just going to turn that off for now, because otherwise you'll be cluttering up air traffic control screens. Come onto the ATC COM, making sure that any messages from previous flights have been deleted, so that should be nice and blank now. And you go onto the connect page. If it's going to let me go on here, and make sure that this would normally say armed instead of connected on the ground, so you just need to make sure that that's showing green. And then we can program our flight plan. So with the information from the OFP, we'd make sure the flight number, departure, destination, and alternate are correct. If there is a company route, it would go in here. Cruise flight level, I leave this as normal, but if there's a significant difference between standard temperature and what the OFP has calculated, we would change that. This is the cruise speed mode, so Econ would basically be your cost index, and long range cruise means you can't change the cost index. It works out the equivalent of about 160 as a cost index, but they want us to fly at cost index 50, we'll do that. Trip wind is normally, in this box, say for example there was an average wind component of 22 knots tailwind. In here you'd press plus 22, put that in this box. Otherwise it's grayed out because there are winds that have already been completely filled out as we downloaded the flight plan. Now there's nothing in here because I don't think we actually have a cruise today because our flight is so short. Make sure that the IRSs have armed correctly, and our departure. Select the departure, you're going to be runway 12 right. We said we were going to fly the Nabix departure, and then in Bahrain they're using runway 12 left. Going to fly an ILS approach, and going to fly the Ordig 1 arrival. So then once that's calculated, I'll be checking down here to make sure that the total route distance makes sense. Now, if there's no information here, it's because it doesn't know how fast you're going to be flying and how much fuel you're going to burn until it has some information on what you weigh. So we said that our zero fuel weight was 140 tons. All right, type it down here. Zero fuel weight CG. Take that from the load sheet. It tells you. There you go. Zero fuel weight CG 25.9, 10.7 tons of fuel. Zero fuel weight CG. Okay. Passengers, let's say we're taking 300 lovely people today. And then at this point, check the OFP for taxi fuel. Route reserve, which is our contingency fuel. Let's have a look. Alternate is 2.0. Route reserve is our contingency, so that's 1.3. And final reserve, 2.1. Alright. It's not unusual to see negative numbers here at this point in time, but that is a bit lower than it would normally be. Maybe we'll bump this up to 11 tons just to make sure we don't run out of fuel. That's given us 11 tons of fuel. All right. Why has it now changed our alternate for us? That's not correct. All right. So essentially from the page here, you just follow these. Normally we just leave the nav aids to auto-tune. And now that we've put some information in the fuel and load page, you'll see that on the flight plan page, we have all of the information we want. We expect it to take about 55 minutes. 300 miles makes sense, and we'll land with 4.6 tons, which is enough. And our performance figures that we calculated earlier, what were they? Takeoff performance, 146, 148, 152, flex 67, and flaps 1 plus F. 146. 148. 152. Flex departure at 67 degrees and flaps 1. Now the final load sheet will tell you your THS position. It should be within 1% of this, guys. So we'll say we've had our final load sheet. This doesn't actually do anything. It will actually move it based on this, but this is just a memo that it will use to check that your trim has been set correctly. We set the thrust to auto derate, which means it won't use full climb thrust to save engine wear, not to save fuel. If there are any step altitudes, you'd put them in here. But as you can see, our optimum level, it wants to go all the way up to 43,000 feet, which on a 55-minute flight is absolutely not possible. So then back on this page, we've done the performance. We would check the route summary. Go to pilot stored routes. If you go here, new route copy active, it will give you a summary of everything that you've got. You could then check that against the OFP to make sure that what's in the FMS matches where you're supposed to be going. And then make sure that you've done these. You could set on the position monitor page Let's say we were planning as a worst case scenario to come back on an immediate return to Dubai runway 12 left, and that will give you a bearing distance to the threshold. And then you build a secondary flight plan to that effect. So if you import the active, it takes all of your data, and there it is. So let's say, for example, we wanted to just go in a straight line, so I'll pick this waypoint. I'll show you what I'm doing here. So this one, if I do a discontinuity from Astes, there will just be it'll drop into heading when it hits this waypoint and just keep flying in a straight line, which is a pretty standard engine out strategy. So if I choose new destination from here, and let's say if we were using the secondary flight plan, destination would be to come back to Dubai, and then we've got a discontinuity, and it would just fly along here until we tell it to do something else. So you plan from there to come back in runway 12 left on ILS approach, and then go to return. So you've got your ILS here, and that's the missed approach. And why are we in the active now? Secondary performance. The information in. There, 70, 7. 39 degrees already? It's 39 degrees already. Excellent. QNH was 1004. And ILS Cat 1 minima for runway 12 left is 220 feet, not 20 feet. 220 feet. And then it would be a really bad day if you were doing an immediate return, but then having to go around. It'd be a really bad day if you had an engine failure, you were doing emergency return and then going around, but we'll just build it all for the sake of completeness. So then our secondary flight plan in Sec 1 is ready for us if we needed to come straight back in an emergency. So if you did have an emergency after takeoff, you just swap active, then your immediate return is there, and that's one less thing for you guys to have to do. So when you've finished your FMS, generally this is the time that your pilot monitoring would come back from their walk around. They would check your handiwork. Once they agree with it, you join together up here. So check the speakers are on. Don't need to be that loud. Check the QNH. So we'll set 1004 and make sure that the altimeters are reading correctly. So that shows about 40 feet. Make sure that the other side reads something similar so that you can fly in RVSM airspace. Not that we're going to today because we're not going that high. Make sure that the standby, that should be within 150 feet, and obviously that currently shows 40 as well. Then you'll set these as you wish. Normally, this would just be on traffic, because if you put ID, what it will do is will show you the information of all of the aeroplanes around, who they are, their ground speed, their wake turbulence category, and it's just too much information. Whereas if you just put it on traffic, they just get shown as proximate traffic, and hopefully we'll see that when we get airborne shortly. These buttons here give you information about the VORs that you have selected. Let me show you. So then these are showing MINHAD and pointing in this direction. So if I turn those off, they disappear. Normally you'd have those on. This is airports around, so that's Sharjah, this is Dubai, that's MINHAD Airbase. And any constraints on the departure. Now that's probably the most important one. You wouldn't press the weather radar on at the moment, because as soon as you press that button, the weather radar will switch on and you may fry somebody in front of you. The pilot monitoring would do the same thing, but usually they would have terrain displayed on their side, which shows you a visual representation of the terrain in front of the aeroplane. So just wait for that to build up, and then you'll see this is the sea, this is the coastline. Normally the flight directors would be off, but you'd now switch them on and make sure that it says climb nav map makes sense. 1 FD2 means the flight directors are on, flight director 1 and 2 are switched on. This is the climb clearance we expect with the SID, and make sure that it's in heading PS and not in true. That's for if you're operating near the North Pole. Okay, so now that you've done this, you do an oxygen test. So it's very loud in the flight deck, but it's even louder on the headset. So the first thing you would do is call downstairs to make sure that So you'd call downstairs to make sure that nobody's listening, or at least to tell them to briefly take their headset off because you're about to make a loud noises in their ear. So then how this works is that you come to the oxygen mask, open it, press this button here, and what you want it to happen is when you press this button, you'll see a flow by a little yellow cross popping up here that then closes. So when you press and hold, then you can normally press this, but you normally have to press and this at the same time, just to make sure this is the emergency flow to make sure that air is flowing to there. And then you want to make sure that the oxygen microphone is working. So there is a microphone built into here, so if you're using oxygen, you can actually talk to each other. So the way you do that is by switching on the intercom, like that. And then you would press this button again. And normally that makes a very, very loud noise in the through the speakers here. So close that. Turn that back off, because otherwise the ground crew can hear all of your conversations. Normally at this point you would have something like guard frequency here, so 1215. This is what you're listening to and the volume. This is VHF2, which is this one. And then Dubai delivery frequency would be 12035 is the next person you're going to speak to. So that would be here. That would be up. And let's say, for example, your pilot monitoring would be the guy on the radio. So they would be speaking to them, and you would be speaking to the ground engineer to talk to him about things like whether you're happy with the final fuel, when they would like to disconnect the APU, etc. So now that you've done that, you've done your oxygen test, the last thing you check is make sure that you've still got enough oxygen, because that test actually uses some oxygen. Make sure that the valve has closed after you've done the test, so this isn't rapidly falling. Then you would do a brief. Now briefings are threat-based, hopefully, and brief, hopefully, clues in the name. But mostly you're experienced pilots operating out of home base, so you'd want to talk about really what's different today. Maybe today you'd talk about busy airspace. Sometimes this 220 knot speed restriction can be an issue, so you'd make sure that you can do it clean. Now we're exceptionally light today, but we could be well over almost 120 tons heavier than this on this aeroplane, where maybe you wouldn't be able to do 220 knots clean, so you'd brief that you'd hang on to flaps 1 until you pass this point, or you've had your speed restrictions removed. Once you'd briefed, you'd wait for the final load sheet to come through. And then you'd be preparing for your departure. So one of the things you'd need to do is disconnect the APU. So once you have disconnected the APU, the ground crew can unplug it. So I'll get them to disconnect the ground power unit, take the chocks away, and the doors are closed. Well, you're in this stage here, you could do the cockpit preparation checklist. You'd maybe get the departure clearance first. So what you do is you take your ATIS, let's say for example this is information alpha, you go to request, clearance, departure, and here we go. So we are on Alpha 3. So this is where you'd get the departure clearance from CPDLC or DCL. ATIS code was, say, information alpha. So this is saying I am asking Dubai to go to Bahrain on an A350-900. Got information alpha and I'm parked on Alpha 3. Transfer that to the mailbox and it appears up here, and then you just send that. Then hopefully you'd get a reply. It would say you are cleared to Dubai via the Nabix 3 Golf SID, which is this one, stopping at 4,000 feet. It'll give you a squawk code, so you come into squawk, change the code, let's say it's 1234. And the next frequency would be 12035. And there we go. Then you would acknowledge it and send it, and then your clearance would be confirmed. Then you do the cockpit preparation checklist. So you come here, cockpit preparation, and you're checking the gear pins and covers have been removed. So that's checking that CM2 has checked these, and that outside during the walk around, any engine covers or probe covers have gone. Make sure you've got enough fuel and that it's balanced. So you open this one, you see that it's 5.5 there, 5.5 there, nothing in the center. That's balanced 11 tons. There's that one. And the barrel to make sure that the QNH is set, so QNH 1004 is set on both sides and on the standby. And that's your checklist complete. So now we are ready to go. Bar the load sheet, you do a PA to the passengers. How we do that is we pick this guy up. Hold down the PA button. Tell them, hi guys, I'm the captain. This is where I'm from. This is who I'm flying with. This is how long it's going to take. Sit down, keep your seatbelt on, and I'll just come back to you before we land with the weather and our expected time of arrival. Enjoy the hospitality, etc. Next, you would get spoken to by the ground crew. They'd say they're ready. The purser and cabin crew would come in and say, can we close the last door? So let's say, for example, you're like this. They close the door and they say, can we close the last one? Yes, you can. And then we'll call you to arm the doors when it's safe to do so. And you speak to the ground crew. The ground crew would say, we are happy, we're checked. They haven't connected the tug. Somewhere on here you would see nose wheel steering disconnect. Yes. To say that they are connected and that they've connected the tug properly. When they have, you're ready. So you would call delivery and say, hey guys, we are the Emirates A380. We're parked on Alpha 3. We're ready. They say, okay, hold position, contact ground on 11835. So you'd go 11835. Say, hey ground, Emirates A380, request pushback and start from Alpha 3. And they'll say, clear to push, face to the west. Once you have your pushback clearance, beacon needs to go on. The transponder needs to go on. So both pilots, surveillance, default settings. Pilot flying would then go to the performance page. Pilot monitoring would display the flight plan page. And you do the before start checklist. Before start checklist here. So park brake is on. Takeoff speeds and thrust, those are there. And they are checked. Slides. Now there's a reminder. Either you would make the PA when it's safe and you know there's nothing around the aeroplane, or the cabin crew would would arm the slides automatically if you haven't made the PA when you start moving. So let's tell them we want them to arm the slides. There they go. Showing here, we have 8 doors, so 8 slides, so those are armed. Nose wheel steering disconnect memo. Yes, that's the one we're looking for. Let's pretend it's there. And that's the before start checklist complete. So let's see if we can get them to push it back. So we'd contact the ground and say, hi guys, we're cleared to push, face west. And they would say, release the park brake. So you'd release your park brake. They would push you, let's say, go that way. There we go. We are out of here. What's going on with that? That's not normal. That's normal. Alright, so halfway through the pushback, when you're clear away from the terminal area, normally the cars would stop while you're pushing back. That's weird. They'd say you're clear to start the engines. So, how do we start the engines? Come down here. Ignition start. So, when your crosses have disappeared, at the moment, you'd wait 10 seconds. Why can I hear the PA? That's really annoying. What's going on? Okay, when we've had our 10 seconds, which we have, start engine 1. I've seen a few people say you start engine 2 first. That's an A320 thing. The 350, you start engine 1. Oh, we've left our truck. Where are you going, bud? Oh, okay. I'm still going backwards. Okay, let's just stop it here. That's weird. Okay, we've stopped. Alright, let's watch these engines start. So you see the THS is out of range. However, once the engine has finished starting, this will move to where it needs to go to. There you go. So now we're in range and it's where it's supposed to be. We started engine 1, so let's start engine 2. This says my joystick is pointing over there somewhere. I'll grab that in a sec while we start moving. That's a cool noise. Honest guys, I have no idea what the weird hallucinogenic stuff is. Let's open these. Hopefully they'll go away when we start moving. Okay, we've got 2 engines available, so then pilot flying, we'll put this back to normal. And come up here. Switch off the APU. Switch on the engine anti-ice if you're in icing conditions. And then pilot monitoring. Arm the spoilers. Reset the rudder trim. And select the flaps as per here. And make sure that there's nothing popped up on ECAM. So that's all correct. Then you do a flight control check. So let me just grab my device. Okay, so from our flight control check, you want to see that we have full up, full down, elevator travel, and then we want to check that the ailerons and spoilers show me full left and full right. For roll control, and then the rudders. Now to do a rudder check, at the moment, the taxi camera doesn't work, it's annoying. You'd normally be able to see the nose wheel here. Now if I just put a bunch of rudder in, it will turn the nose wheel. So on here you've got a pedal disconnect button. So you would press and hold that and then put full rudder in. And when you do so, you'll be able to just control the rudder without turning the nose wheel. So you want full left and full right. Then pilot monitoring will do the same thing on their side, just without the rudders. So there's only one rudder check. Once that's done, you'd look out here, make sure that your ground crew are clear of the airplane. They've given you a thumbs up. And then you'd be thinking about the taxi. So you do the after start checklist first. After start checklist. So anti-ice, we didn't need it. Flight controls are checked. Ground clearance we've had, and that's the after start checklist complete. Now, to taxi, you're going to want to display a couple of things. These are the charts, so we'd maybe come in here and say we're on Zulu. We're going to go to Kilo 5 is the thing, but we only had performance from the full length, so we'd go Zulu all the way down to Kilo 1. For the purposes of today, I'll use Kilo 5. Then to help us navigate, you could put this in ARC mode and use the ANF. So that shows you where you are. We're going to go from here to Kilo 5. And then when you get your taxi clearance, taxi light goes on. And off we go. So what's our normal seating position? That would be it. And you'd release the park brake. All right. So you check that you're clear left. You check that you're clear right. Now we'll taxi in a straight line. Can get rid of that so that I've got more information. Then when you are moving, you do a brake check. So all you're checking here Why is the flight control page still up? You want to just check that the brake works. So you gently press the brakes. On the 350, it works differently to the 320 and the 380, so there's no response required to the brake check call-out. What on earth are these weird noises? It's like I can hear stuff happening in the cabin. Now, in Dubai, on Zulu, there's a speed limit of 15 knots. Oh, is this the nose wheel making that noise? Now, the nose wheel does make noises, but not that much. So then while you're taxiing out, it would become apparent that your clearance is still valid. So if they've cleared you to the same holding point and there's no changes to the departure that you were expecting, I think that might actually be some crazy nose wheel noise. That's really weird. Let's have a look. Kilo 5 over there, nearly there. So you'd have a little rebrief to make sure that you're both still on the same page. You can see Kilo 5 over there. But your main priority is navigation. So you'd confirm amongst yourselves that the departure, the emergency turn, etc. is still the same. Put the traffic back on. Put the weather radar on at this point. And that's okay. So now we have a turn coming up. I want the speed to be around or below 10 knots. So I'm going to start that turn, and the aeroplane has stopped completely, which is great. There's Kilo 5. Making sure that it is clear on our right-hand side. And once you've done that, so pilot flying would switch on the weather radar. Pilot monitoring would do a couple of things, but I'll show you those once we've stopped, just so that I can prioritize navigating. Welcome to Kilo 5. Alright. Let's just stop here for a sec. Okay, so we're not moving. I'll put the park brake on. We wait for the cabin to be ready here. Now you would be able to look here on the video and see. Can you show me another? No. Normally these knobs here would change the camera angle so you can see how the cabin crew are getting on. But we're still waiting for the cabin to be ready. So pilot flying at this point would switch the weather radar on. Pilot monitoring would put the auto brake to RTO, then press the takeoff config push button. Now, if it doesn't work, you may need to, you can in the real airplane just press it, but on some simulators you have to hold it. There you go. So now we have cabin ready. This is all green. We can do what's known as the taxi checklist. Checklist menu, taxi checklist, flap setting. So we want to see config 1. So we check here. That was 1. That was 1 plus F. That's correct. The radar is on. And that's the taxi checklist complete. We are now ready for departure. So to help us navigate when we're ready, I'm going to have my ND showing nav because we've got a turn. If we were flying in a straight line, I would just have it on arc mode so that it just looks in front of us. But because we're turning around after departure, I'll have it on nav. And then we would get our departure clearance. So what chart do I want to see here? On the SID. That one, isn't it? Not that I'm really referencing it during departure, but it's there if we need it. Okay. So when air traffic control say that we can line up, first thing we want to do is A, make sure that it's clear, put the strobes on and release the parking brake. Now then C, pilot monitoring would tell the cabin crew that we're going, and we'll do the lineup checklist. So cabin is advise the takeoff runway will confirm that we're on runway 12 right, which is where we're supposed to be, and that the packs are on and they're supposed to be on. And they'll give us our takeoff clearance. To acknowledge the takeoff clearance, we put the landing light on, and the nose wheel light goes to takeoff, and then we are just about ready to go. So I'll line up on the runway and I'll talk you through the takeoff procedure. Now, unlike the A380, on the A350 we are back to inputting a forward side stick input during the initial part of the takeoff roll, and we'll hold half side stick up until about 80 knots and then release. Let me just pause here and I'll get rid of those silly blue waypoint markers. Okay. Alright, we're ready. So we are cleared for takeoff. And we're going to push half side stick forward. We're going to set 25% thrust. I don't know how to get rid of those. Wait for those engines to stabilize. And flex 67, SRS runway. Those engine noises, they sound cool, but they're wrong. So we're checking the thrust is set. I'll read flex 67, SRS runway, and the order thrust blue. Gonna bring that side stick back to neutral now. And then as we approach V1 and rotate,
V1.
gonna raise the nose. Up to 12.5 degrees initially. And then just follow the SRS. Now they're airborne. Going to engage the autopilot. So we're in climb. Moving the thrust levers back to climb. And now that we're in climb, no longer in SRS mode, and we're above S speed, we can ask for and select flap 0. Hello, cute. There's flap 0, and with flap 0, what we can do is disarm the spoilers. Hello. Turn off these lights. And off we go. So there would probably be a frequency change now, and then they would clear us to climb higher. So if we say we climb via the SIDS to 13,000 feet. Right, what do we have here? We have alt magenta and 5,000. That is because... well, it's wrong, isn't it? So ASTER's at 5,000 feet or below. See, now when you've passed that ASTER's restriction, now changed to alt blue 13,000. It means there is no more restrictions. And we'll climb all the way up to 13,000 feet. See, the managed speed target has got us to 220 knots. That's because of this one here. This is a minimum 200 knots. This is a maximum 220. And we've met that restriction. So let's say they cleared us to climb all the way up to flight level 240. Now then, when we are above 5,000 feet, at least in my company, once the flaps have been retracted and we're not expecting any turbulence, we can release the cabin crew for what they want to do. And we would do that either by making a PA saying you're cleared for your duties, or we can cycle the seatbelt sign like that. That will make a bing bong in the cabin, and that means they can go and do their work. Passengers, maybe I would leave a little bit longer, just to allow the cabin crew to do what they need to do initially. Cool feature of the A350, see on here, we've got the aircraft on the chart. This actually is a thing on the real airplane. It's shown as an orange circle on our charts, but it does work exactly the same as this, which is a nice new addition. And then the next thing that would happen as we go through 10,000 feet, we have a set of checks that we would do. So you see we're passing this waypoint now with the 220 knot restriction. It will go, should go all the way to 300 because we're above 10,000 feet now. There we go. 285 is our climb speed today. So passing 10,000 feet, we can turn off the landing lights. This is the point I'd probably let the passengers go. So I'd leave that on auto. But the seatbelt sign has gone off. Then we confirm that the level we've got is the level we want to go to. 240 seems to work on this sector. That will give us a cruise of 650 and what's our top of descent? 720. That'll give us a 30-minute cruise segment, which is sort of reasonable, I guess. Then you would decide, had you used any fix info lines here to help you with your tracking for an engine failure after takeoff? You would delete those now because you're not using them. And maybe you would clear this secondary because you're not returning to Dubai. You haven't had any failures by copying the active flight plan into secondary 1 and overwriting. Now again, airline policy differs here. So the transition altitude here is 13,000 feet. See here. So 1,000 feet before the transition altitude and cleared to a flight level, we would set standard. So we do that by pushing on these. Push, and they are linked in this simulator. That's one of the options you can set just to make it easier, but you'd have to press them individually. You'd confirm that both altimeters are reading standard and they're reading about the same. And you do the same with the ISIS, which is there. And then you just fly to Bahrain. It's a nice short flight, so obviously you'd be doing things like navigating and speaking to air traffic control, briefing your approach. Normally, on a longer flight, you would spend this time now just monitoring the climb. There's really no rush, but on these nice short flights, then you could be keeping busy for pretty much all of it. Let's have a look at some aeroplane shots from the outside then. There's a very pretty aeroplane. Alright. So, eventually, your mind would turn towards the arrival. So you'd come and get yourself an arrival ATIS. Cancel the auto update. You'd do the same thing here. If the aircraft has, if the aerodrome has a digital ATIS system, which Bahrain does, but it's not going to be working for us today. Let's have a look at some en route maps. Zoom out. There's our route. What does this do? That's exciting. Here are our waypoints that we're flying along. Still on the SID at the moment. It won't let me scroll, which is a bit of a pain. But on the maps on the A350, you can actually hold down here. Say, for example, we wanted the weather for Dubai World Central. Hold down here and it would give you the weather because the OIT system here is now connected to the internet. What else can I tell you? There's Port City of Abu Dhabi going all the way down there. The 350 itself is quite noisy on the ground. You'll have heard when the gear was down. That is actually pretty realistic. As you start the rotation, there's usually an audible bump. And what that is the nose wheel hitting full extension just as you start to rotate the front of the aeroplane. It is normal. It doesn't sound healthy, but these aeroplanes have been flying around for more than 10 years now, so I guess it's expected behavior, and Airbus has decided it's safe, but it doesn't seem too comfortable. What can we do in the meantime then? Let's get some charts for the arrival. Terminal charts for Bahrain. It's going to be an Ordig 1 arrival. So that's low vis. Star, RNF stars for 12 left. This is the Ordigger 1 arrival. Comes along here, turns around, goes that way. But you don't tend to fly all of it. It'd be a radar vector. So I shall pin that guy. Star would be the... That's a VOR. I don't want to do it. VOR. Where's the ILS and 1-2 left? Oh, here. Okie dokie. And then a ground chart would be useful. Ground chart, that one. So now you could make a plan. Normally, in an ideal scenario, you would do this the day before. Give yourself more capacity to fly the airplane. But let's have a look at the plan. So RNAV stars for 1-2 left. You could put this into plan mode. Bring that down to 20. And then if you go onto your flight plan page, you could scroll through your flight plan. And you see from Ordig, it goes to Lovac. So Ordig, Lovac. And then it's to Alsace, to Regag, between 7,000 and 5,000 feet. And that's at 5,200. So if you want to scroll through this, you can actually use this wheel here. And then that puts the waypoint you're using here at the top. You see how they're not quite as accurate as they are on the chart? That's because you're moving. And this says you're going to be doing 250 knots here and 210 knots here. Regag, Alras out here. And then it just goes in a straight line until you pick up the approach chart. And then at some point you'll get a vector from Alras, which is here, to the ILS. So let's have a look, make sure that the ILS is correct. So this says here, from the final approach fix, you want to be at 1,500 feet. It's going to be a 4-mile final, inbound course of 116 degrees, and it's a 3-degree slope. So that says, why does it say 116? That's not correct. That says 120, which is correct, but this is not. That's somewhat unusual. We'll keep an eye on it when we get there. All right. So we've confirmed that this bit is correct, even if this isn't. And then you look at the missed approach, which basically says go straight ahead to 2,500 feet, which is straight ahead, climb 2,500 feet. On this page here, you would put the weather. So descent speeds, we maybe wouldn't do 300 knots into Bahrain, so let's set to 80. And 0.85 would be lovely, but we're at 24,000 feet, we're going to be about 0.67. We'll see in 1,000 feet, but that's a more realistic descent speed. That will, if that's correct, then it will help calculate your descent profile. So then we'll get the weather from the ATIS. Now one cool thing here is that if you're on a mouse and you're controlling it with the scroll wheel here, you can actually move your, because this is one screen, you can move your cursor over to the CM2 screen. You can put it on there. Say, for example, you wanted him to have the ATIS. Normally you'd have to reach over and push this button, but on the 350, you take your mouse cursor across to his screen, control it that way. So speed out cruise star mean that we have reached our cruise altitude, and TCAS can now go downwards because that's where we're going to go next. But let's just do one thing at a time. So descent speed we've got. Let's have a look at the weather for Bahrain. And it looks like currently it is 170 degrees, 10 knots, 33. And hopefully the QNH is the same as it was in Dubai. And the minimum, I'm going to fly a Cat 1 approach, and it's a Cat C aeroplane, so it's 250 feet. And what these other numbers are, this is the height above ground level, and this is the visibility required in meters, so it says here. So we need 550 meters RVR, 250 feet is the minimum. So we'll stick 250 here. Other things you would change, the flight transition, if the QNH is different to standard. Now today we'll leave it as 150, and I normally land the 350 in config 3 because brake temperatures are really not an issue and it's very efficient. For go around, 2,500 feet. Now you could leave this as standard. My airline prefers us to fly one continuous climb all the way up to acceleration altitude, so that's just what I'm used to flying. And then you could do other things like change this to just in case we needed a distance to threshold. And then any secondary flight plans, if maybe there was another runway or another approach you wanted to plan, you could do that in here, but for now I'll just leave this as a copy. So, then while we're on plan mode here, we could set the BTV for our arrival. Wait for the airport map to load. It doesn't load automatically, which it's going to. So I think that's probably downloading something in the background. Alright, so let's have a look at 350 BTV. So this aeroplane will select the landing runway by itself, and all you have to do is select your runway exit. Now you say here, if you go to landing, you check the runway performance code. You see it says dry 6 is the pink line, and then there's your wet line. So if I change this to wet, they would merge together. If the weather was particularly worse, all the way down to condition code 1 or 0, if there was snow, which I'm sure there isn't in Bahrain, then you would do that. And you can still use BTV, or at least it's called BTV, but it would be BTV Contam. And then it's essentially a maximum auto brake mode, but it will tell you if you're going to make your selected exit or not. For normal operations, dry 6, and let's plan to vacate at Alpha 5. Is it going to let me select Alpha 5? Please. You. Set BTV exit. So that will tell us that Alpha 5 is 1,750 meters into our runway, for which the landing distance available is 3,960 meters. And we can check that here. See here, 3,657. But with a displaced threshold of 307 meters, that makes it 3,964. But actually, the number that should be displayed up here is this one, 3657. It's not tarmac length, it's actual landing distance available. But clearly, it's long enough. This is runway occupancy time, so it's in seconds how long it should be you will need the runway for to complete your landing and vacate. And the turnaround times are expected time to get down to 150 degrees if you use maximum reverse and idle reverse. Now this is a little unrealistic, certainly at this weight, which is very light for a 350, these are going to say 30 and 30. Brake temperatures are not an issue. Now we've selected our exit, but we haven't actually engaged the BTV yet, so there's nothing here. So once you've got your exit selected, you press the auto brake button, and now you've got BTV there. So that's our BTV set up. And now we see this is our top of descent arrow, and you can scroll down in the flight plan and tell the cabin crew that in exactly 20 minutes time will be our top of descent. And again, now would be the time where you'd make a PA to the passengers and say, hi guys, me again. We're going to be starting our descent in 20 minutes. The weather is 33 degrees, got a light easterly breeze, and thanks for flying with us, etc. Normally prior to descent, you'd set the arrival QNH on the ISIS just as a reference. And then we'd brief. And again, we'd cover things like how we're planning to fly the approach, what's different. So the threats for Bahrain clearly are that if this is the arrival and it goes there, maybe we'll go from here to here and straight in. So if we're just using the FMS track miles to calculate our descent, maybe we might not have enough track miles and we'll end up having to catch up with the speed brakes. So we would identify that as a threat, that track shortening could be a thing in Bahrain. And it is. It is quite common. There would, of course, be lots of frequency changes for us between here and there. We fly through the new Doha FIR into Bahrain, and they have lots of descent restrictions that we'd have to make. Usually after ORMID, you start a gradual step descent and then a more open descent on the way as you get closer to Bahrain. What else would we do? Grab a cup of coffee, go use the bathroom, make sure that we've got our charts. Sometimes you could get hold of the handling agent on arrival on the second radio and speak to them, find out where you're parking. And you'd include that sort of thing in your briefing. You always got to be careful briefing taxi routings, because if air traffic control gives you something different, confirmation bias is a very real thing, and due to the traffic situation, they might want you to do something different. So our plan for the day today is to come off at Alpha 5. Could maybe select Alpha 6, would give us better brake energy. And this aeroplane requires 5 minutes engine cool down after landing anyway. So taking a nice short taxi off, and we actually park somewhere here, taking a nice short taxi off maybe isn't the best thing, because then you're just going to be sitting on stand waiting for the engines to cool down. So let's have a look at changing our BTV. And it's very, very easy to do. So where we've got Alpha 5 here, is it going to let me move it? It is. Okay. What you could just do is just select Alpha 6 and go select BTV exit. Now, that doesn't normally disconnect the BTV, but now we've got Alpha 6. They should be lower numbers because this is further down the runway, so that's slightly incorrect, but now we'll use Alpha 6 as our BTV, and BTV is blue. So then we would brief, maybe we're going to get Alpha 6, taxi on runway 12 right or 30 left. This is used mainly as a taxiway in Bahrain. Or they might want us to go through uniform, depending on traffic. And is there a parking chart? APC. There is a parking chart. Normally we'd park 15 or 16 somewhere here. And that's pretty much the cruise and descent planning routine. TCAS is pointing. Let's have a look through the systems, make sure that they're all operating correctly. You would do that by doing one of two things. Either you can select these buttons individually and have a look, or you can press the All button. Press it once, and you see they've got a list of systems down here. Just keep pressing the All button, and it will cycle through. Or you could actually scroll through the systems using this wheel here. So, let me talk you through what we've got. Engines, everything's green. That all looks good. Let's go on to CB. Doors page. We're checking, obviously all the doors are still armed. Cabin vertical speed should be 0 at this point. Wheels, temperatures look pretty good and nice and even. Fuel page, no signs of a leak there, but this system here, you see how it's got the fuel on board plus the fuel used minus what you started with. This will if this number is increasing, it means there's a difference between how much fuel you should have and how much fuel you do have, and maybe that's an early sign of a fuel leak. Electrics are all good, all of our generators are working. It's likewise on the DC page. Hydraulics are good. Engineers never really came and serviced that green reservoir. Flight control page. Does look like we're flying slightly out of trim. See here, the trim is slightly off to one side, which actually agrees with this, which is very unusual, considering we did reset the rudder trim. This button doesn't actually do anything with the autopilot engaged anyway, but worth bearing in mind that that's slightly unusual. APU is now switched off because we're not using it, and the bleeds appear to be operating normally. Temperatures come down nicely. That's maybe a little chilly for the cabin, but we don't control that. See up here, you've got this set to purser selection, and that allows the cabin crew to control the temperature in the cabin. This is how we control the temperature in the flight deck. Just leave that around sort of the 10, 11 o'clock position. That gives you a pretty good temperature. What else have we got? Cabin pressure. Again, you definitely want that to be normal. So 2,500 feet. There is another switch usually here. We have a humidifier installed, which combined with a nice low cabin altitude, so at cruise level, around 39 to 41,000 feet, our cabin altitude sits around 5,000 feet, coupled with the humidifier, means that over a long career, this is a very, very nice aeroplane indeed to work on. And then the last one it comes through is just to the video page and the circuit breakers, but thankfully none of the circuit breakers have popped. So we'll just clear that. This is our cruise page. So let's talk about how we go down. So we would wait for our descent arrow if we wanted to. But in terms of how to go down and when to go down, generally the only bit of maths you need to be an airline pilot is the 3 times table. So for now, let's say, for example, I was at 24,000 feet and I wanted to get down to a relative approach speed to make an approach. I would times this by 3. So let's say that's 72. So I would need 72 miles to lose this height, roughly. And then it's about 1 mile per 10 knot of speed. So we'd land about 120 knots, and we're doing 280. So that's about another 16 miles plus our 72. So we'd need about 85 miles or so to make our descent and approach. The wind can play a factor. So with a 25 knot headwind, maybe we would need a couple of miles less because that will help. But if that headwind becomes a tailwind as we start our approach in this direction, then we would need to be more conservative in our descent planning because the tailwind's going to carry us further forward at a faster rate than we might want. And that applies in all scenarios. I'll try and talk you through the descent and approach scenario as we get there. But that's pretty much the calculation that I am making constantly throughout the approach. I see a lot of questions online about modes and why won't my aeroplane descend when I want it to. There's several ways to skin a cat or to make the aeroplane go down whenever you want it to. Let's say the easiest way is, sorry, I should have set that to there as per the OEB. Let's say we were cleared down to 10,000 feet. I would just select 10,000 feet here and then just pull that, and then what we'll get is open descent here and thrust idle on this is the auto thrust mode, this is the vertical mode, this is the lateral mode. This won't change. You just pull this. You'll go to open descent, you'll get idle thrust, and then the speed will be controlled by the elevators. So at idle thrust, the aeroplane will just pitch down to maintain whatever speed is selected up here, and that will be the quickest you'll be able to make the aeroplane go down in that mode at that speed without using speed brakes. Now, the FMS is very good at calculating the optimum descent profile, but as with all computers, the same applies. May have heard the phrase rubbish in, rubbish out. So if the FMS has all of the information, including the winds and the temperature on arrival, and it is an accurate representation of what you're actually going to fly, then it's a very, very good tool, and it's far more accurate than you or I could calculate from top of descent to landing. However, we saw earlier on our arrival into Bahrain that the arrival isn't connected. So let's have a look at the star chart. It gets to Al Ras and then just goes off on a heading. Now, it assumes you go from Al Ras direct to the next waypoint in the FMS. But that's not always the case because of traffic. And likewise, you use your experience. Maybe we would turn before that. Maybe we'll go from here to here. Maybe we'll go from here to here. And you'd have to calculate that yourself. So relying on the FMS is not necessarily the best way to go about it, although it does make your job easier when you are a new pilot. It did catch me out once. I used to fly for EasyJet. I remember an approach when I was a new pilot flying into Portugal. We turned final, and looking down, we were clearly high as the runway was directly beneath the nose of the aeroplane, and we had to make a rather embarrassing orbit, flying around in circles to lose the height. Because we had relied too much, or I had relied too much on the FMS, and that was a very valuable lesson indeed. So generally, this descent arrow here is where the FMS thinks you should begin a descent, and that will calculate, therefore, an idle thrust descent all the way down based on the information that it has. However, if I were to select, so I'm too close to get the ILS information, but remember we put the distance to threshold in here now. 113 miles if I went in a straight line from here to the threshold. But the FMS thinks we're going to fly 147 miles. So there's 34 miles difference there. Meaning that if I were to go at the shortest possible route, which is unfeasible and unrealistic, I could well be 10,000 feet higher than I should have been. Remember, we used 3 times table. We got 30 miles. Times that by 3, that's about 9,000 feet higher than we should be. So there is a scope for shortcuts. So like I say, relying exclusively on the FMS can get you into trouble. So then if the FMS thinks that we need to descend here and air traffic control asks us to descend now, what will we do? If I put this into a managed descent now, it's not going to just dive down with idle thrust as fast as it can. If I were to put it into a managed descent at position SOLOB, it will use idle thrust and follow the ideal descent profile for these 141 miles. But now, if I were to push this to put it into a managed descent, so an FMS managed descent, it will descend at 1,000 feet per minute until it catches this profile. And then it will rejoin its idle thrust profile. Maybe that's the correct thing to do, maybe it isn't. Or, on another scenario, maybe you get to SOLOB and there's an aeroplane 2,000 feet below you. The FMS descent profile doesn't know about other traffic. So it will go, let's go idle thrust and follow our lovely ideal descent profile. If there's an aeroplane below you, you're going to scare him and probably set off his TCAS. Now what TCAS is this system here, and it will tell you and automatically reduce the rate of descent of the aeroplane if you get too close to avoid a collision. And it involves paperwork, and nobody likes paperwork. So another scenario then where just blindly following the FMS could well get you into trouble. So as we said before, if I were to pull this, it will go into open descent, disregard all of the constraints, and just go down with idle thrust as fast as it can. Maybe that's not appropriate. But maybe I also don't want the FMS to do it, which is where the vertical speed comes in. Let's say I want to descend now to be level at Ivaco at flight level 220. So if I set 220 in there, it doesn't tell me where I'm going to be level, but I can see 7:15, time now 7:13. If I were to descend at about 1,000 feet a minute, let's see. Come on, aeroplane, tell me. Normally, you'll get another little arrow here to tell you where you will level off. But it's not doing it. No, okay. So normally we would get a little blue arrow pointing like this, which will tell you at your current rate of descent, this is where you will reach your selected altitude of 220. But again, I can use math. So it shows 7:16 in 5 seconds, and it's currently 7:14 and just after 5 seconds to lose 1,300 feet. If I set this to about 7, there you go, it's worked. 700 feet a minute. There you go. It'll take us to flight level 220 at Ivaco. Not sure what's going on with this little holographic green thing. Pretend that's not there. And then when you are descending, you'll see now it tells you your ideal profile or your current position relative to your ideal profile. Now, because we're descending before the FMS thinks we should have descended, it shows you're now 1,000, 1,100, nearly 1,200 feet below the optimum profile because it thinks you should still be at flight level 240, and you idiot, you have started descending too soon. One thing I would definitely do is, as we've started our descent, cabin crew need the passengers out of the way, so I'll put the seatbelt sign on. Normally, as per my airline, they should be on by 25,000 feet to give them time to secure the cabin before we land. So this is where we'd be speaking to Doha. There'd be lots of descent restrictions here because of all of the Qatar Airways traffic taking off underneath us. So we really, really have to be careful of the rate of descent coming across this particular airspace. And then when we get to about Obros or Solob, then we're clear of their airspace and we would dive towards the runway. Alt star means it's going to level off. There's that 280 knots that we selected, as per here. And how long have we realistically got? 80 miles, 22,000 feet with some speed to lose. Actually, if we were going to go in on direct routing now, this would be the time to be starting our idle thrust descent. So then how do we fly the approach? We'll talk about it now as a sort of a pre-flight briefing. In fact, before I do that, you notice now we've started our descent. We don't have our arrow for when we should continue our descent. In a real airplane, it should be there, but there's usually a way you can wake it up. You go direct to the actual waypoint you're currently flying to. But you can do that on here as well. Can I press escape? Yeah, I can press escape. Present position, direct to Rabla, which is where we're going anyway. Then it should recalculate. Should. I don't know what on earth is going on here. Maybe I've ruined it. No. Oh, it still says we're 2,000 foot below profile. I don't know what's going on here. That's unusual. Okay. Let's say they clear us present position direct to ORDIG. There's a couple of ways you can do that. You can either press direct to here, go on here, and select it from the list. Direct to, or you can have direct to with your beams, and it will tell you that you'll keep those waypoints. And there you go. Now we're flying direct to ORDIG, and this is Abeam Alrep, Abeam Solob, Abeam Obros, Abeam Rabla. But now, of course, helpfully, it's not telling us when we should be descending, or maybe it's just thinking. So we'll have to work it out ourselves then, won't we? 91 miles, that would be about 27,000 feet, and we'd need a bit of space to slow down, so we're at 22. It's not so bad. Or you could do it the other way around and say I'm at 22,000 feet. That would mean I need 66 miles and about 10 miles to slow down. At 76, we've got 89. Profile looks pretty good. So let's give ourselves the chance of accepting a shortcut. Let's say they clear us down to flight level 100. So remember, there's two ways we can do this. Either we can go to open descent, which is like that. There you go. By pulling it, you go open descent, you get thrust idle. Engines come all the way back. Open descent, and now it will just use the elevator to control the managed descent. Sorry, to control the speed. If I were to push this, it'll go to speed, DES, which is the managed descent mode, like this. And then it will probably come back to 1,000 feet per minute because it thinks that we are below profile. So now it will go to 1,000 feet a minute. And what this is a range of speed that it can use to manage, keep us within that descent profile window. So it can either fly slowly to keep the engines at idle, or if you were slightly above the profile, you'd get idle thrust, and then it would use this extra 20 knot speed that it has here, but it will not exceed 300 knots. So it will pitch down with idle thrust, go to 300 knots, and then that would mean it will descend faster to catch up the profile. What this little squiggly blue arrow here means is that at our current descent rate of 1,000 feet per minute, at position ORDIG, it will catch up with where it should have been for our managed descent. If we were going to fly all of these track miles, which we're not, because I'm going to give myself a shortcut. So, speed descent, that's what managed descent mode looks like. And that only works in nav mode. So let's say, for example, right now they say fly heading 290 degrees. So I'm going to go 290 and pull it. You see, it changes. You get the lovely beep to vertical speed and heading. And if I try to push this, pushing it, and nothing happens. This is one of the reasons why some people can't make the airplane go down, is because they're flying in heading mode, not nav mode, and you're trying to engage a managed descent. What you can do is you can pull it. And then you pull it, you go to thrust idle open descent, and that's how you would fly a descent in heading mode. So let's say air traffic controller is super kind to us now, and they say you can fly present position direct to ALRES. So we're going to go to there, insert that, and then it goes into nav. Now it stays in open descent. If I wanted the aircraft to keep an eye on my descent for me now, I could now push this and go speed, descent, nav. And we're going to Alras, and then it will reduce the rate of descent until we catch up with this descent profile here. Now, is Alras realistic? Alras center fix. Yeah? Okay. So I'm actually going to leave that. I'm going to let the aeroplane do its thing and see how well Inibuilds have programmed this FMS. Let's see what we're looking at on the FMS and what it's using. So it thinks it's going to go to Alras. This triangle here is an overfly. So let's say, for example, you wanted to overfly this particular waypoint here. You've got overfly. The little asterisk means you'd have to confirm it. So if I press that, you'd have to confirm it. But this means it already will overfly Alras. And that's because on this chart here, Alras, you see it's got a circle around the waypoint. Same as Elelo. But places like Rigag doesn't have that circle. And those are not waypoints that have to be overflown. You can fly by them. So you could allow the airplane to cut this corner here if necessary, whereas this one you can't. So it's flying to Alras. Then it's going to turn onto a heading of 300 and then somehow reposition itself automatically to the center fix on runway 12 left. I'm not sure how that's going to work because it says it's going to fly heading 300, but also thinks it's going to turn. That's not correct. And what do these mean? Now, the 350 has a really cool new technology that previous Airbus aircraft don't have. And it will automatically fly a constant descent approach for you. Now, the gold standard for approaches for modern airliners is to keep the engines at idle and the descent going all the way through to being established on final and fully configured. That is the most efficient way you can fly an aeroplane, and if it's the most efficient, it's also the quietest way that you can fly an aeroplane. So they really do push for pilots to try to manage that where possible. And it's actually my favorite part because it's the only thing that requires any sort of talent or calculation or thinking realistically in our jobs. So being able to fly an accurate CDA is a quite a big source of pride for airline pilots. And like I say, it's one of the last arts that we have left. However, Airbus have taken it away from you. And they said here, this is the point. You see the one, I'll just zoom in slightly. See, the 1 and the 2 on here are the last point at which you can select flaps 1 and the last point at which you can select flaps 2 to allow the aeroplane to automatically fly its own CDA. This is flashing now because we are below the transition level. So we said our transition was flight level 150 and we're below that, so we should be on QNH now. Both on QNH, now QNH 1004, and it's now flying with reference to QNH as opposed to standard. Now you see it thinks it's below the profile, so it's slowed down as long as it can to keep the engines at idle. When it reaches that minimum speed, it has to put power on. All right, let's come back up here, work out where we are. So as we descend, all we're doing at the moment is monitoring, speaking to air traffic control. It looks like we might well have a tailwind on base leg, so we're going to be moving that configuration earlier. Now, yes, we're using the FMS to calculate, but I'm also trying to keep an eye and my mind on if the FMS is correct, because realistically the FMS isn't flying the airplane, we are. So 12,000 feet would need 36 miles. Another 10 miles or so to slow down, we need about 44. We've got 42. And with that bit of tailwind component, I would suggest that the FMS has us higher than I would feel comfortable with. Air traffic control now clears us down to 4,000 feet. So how would I intervene if I think we're higher than I would like to be? I'm going to pull this and go to open descent. Then it's going to pitch down to 280 knots. To maintain because this is the speed it wants, now it's going to have to push the nose down to increase the aircraft speed because I've told it I want thrust idle. That's the quickest way you'll descend. As we get to 10,000 feet, you'll see the speed target comes to 250 knots. That is a global speed limit of 250 knots at 10,000 feet. You see that here? Descent speed limit 250 knots at or below 10,000 feet. So now it's coming back to 250 knots. It thinks we're low, but because I wasn't happy with its descent profile planning. And then the other thing you'd do, as you pass through 10,000 feet, put the landing lights on, put the LS push buttons on. Now this displays your reference. So our reference is the ILS, so India Bravo, India Bravo. And is that correct? According to our ILS chart. India Bravo is the ILS. Also see it here. That's correct. 111.5 is also correct. That's our inbound course of 120 degrees. And it doesn't have a localizer at the moment because, sorry, a glide slope at the moment because the glide slope goes out this way and we're nowhere near it. Then, that says we were doing more than 250 knots below 10,000 feet. On the position monitor page, just confirm these days that we have our GPS. So that's what nav primary means. I'm just going to slow us down. So by selecting the speed, I'm taking the control of the speed away from the aeroplane. So this magenta dot is the aircraft managed speed target. So if I were to manage the speed like that, it would stay at 250 knots. I want to control it myself. So I'm going to select 210. So now I'm going to reassess my descent planning. 7,000 feet, I want 21 miles and about 9 miles or so. This says we have 29 miles. So we're in about the right place. Descent fuel on board below minimum just means that it thinks we need 4.2 to land with final reserve plus enough fuel to go to our alternate, and it thinks currently we're going to land with 4.0, and that means that we are now committed to land at Bahrain, which is okay because the weather's nice. We're not going to go anywhere else, and it's actually pretty common. So 210 knots. 6,500 feet, about to turn base, and now our tailwind has turned into a headwind, which is good for us. That will help our planning. And then now that we've gone through 10,000 feet, I've checked our nav primary, we've put the landing lights on, we've put the LS push buttons on, we would do our approach checklist. Approach checklist, the barrel ref, we've confirmed that, QNH 1004. The minimum is up here now, within 250 miles, that shows up here. 250 for the ILS, which is correct. So you say Barrow 250. The runway condition is set as dry, condition code 6, and the auto brake is BTV. So that's the approach checklist complete. Now we can plan on our arrival. Now I'm going to go 200 knots. Let's have a look. So we're at 5,600 feet. I want 15, 16, 17 miles for that, and about 5 miles to slow down. So I need about 22. That says we've got 23. And then I can start looking. So here, this is the final approach fix for runway 12 left at 1,500 feet. That is 15 miles away, which would need 4,500 feet to lose. And we're at 5,300 with a bit to slow down. I think that would be pretty good. So I'm going to fly us on a heading of 270. Now, you wouldn't do this without air traffic control clearance, but there's no air traffic control. Now I'm going to tidy this up. We're not going to go as far as Alras. So I'm going to go direct to... say the final approach course. And then rather than just direct to, I want to intercept this radial in. So I'm going to select course in of 120 degrees. So it's just going to intercept that course, but I'm not going to fly that. I just want it as a reference. So I'm going to select that. What happens now is that, see, it would go out all the way out there, follow this heading that I've set, until it gets to a point where it will do one continuous turn to intercept that. And that's because we've got nav blue. Air traffic control now clears us down to 2,000 feet. And I don't want it to do that. I want to do this myself. So I'm going to pull heading. And we were on heading 270. All right. The other thing we do at this point, as we get close, we're not going to hold. I'm going to activate the approach phase. So now you see the pink dot up here. If I were to manage the speed, it'll go to 250 knots, which I really don't want. I'm going to go to activate the approach phase. Now the managed speed target becomes green dot for now. See, the green dot is now got the magenta dot hiding behind it. Let's say air traffic control now clears us down to 1,500 feet, which is our platform altitude. I'm going to slow down to 180 knots. Unusual in a modern airliner to be able to do 180 knots clean. And if there's any wake turbulence around, that poses a threat. So I'm now going to select flaps 1, see that coming up here. Now you see the limiting speed here. Because we're below 203 knots, I think it is on the 350, you get 1 and F at the same time. If we were faster than that, you'd just get config 1 first. So you see, as it's slowing down, the rate of descent has decreased to prioritize the speed. Now I'm looking again. I see I've got about 8 miles to lose 2,000 feet. That's pretty good. So I'm going to allow the airplane to come right onto heading 250. And I see 10 miles, 3,000 feet. That's good also. So now I can afford to reduce the vertical speed. So I've got speed, vertical speed. And I could probably come all the way back to 500 feet a minute from here. So now, if I've got 1,500 feet as my target, this is where I'm going to be 1,500 feet, and this is where I want it to be. So if I set about 700 feet per minute, this is my glide slope now. 10 miles, 2,700 feet, slightly low. That makes sense. All right, so let's come left onto a heading of about 230. And now I'm looking at my arrow where I'm going to be at 1,500 feet. Now this is good. It means I'm slightly below profile, which is good. You don't want to be descending on top of it. Ideally, a CDA would be flown at about 500 feet a minute because it gives you room to increase that rate of descent if you need to. Now come on to a heading of 210, which is our base leg.
2,500.
2,500 means you are... Now you're within the altitude at which your radio altimeter works. So it's now displayed on the bottom of the PFD. Bring my range in so I can see. Now then, when do we turn? See, we've got 189 knots ground speed. When I am 1.9, so a tenth of this, left or cross track away from the ideal path, then I'll turn onto a 30-degree intercept. So onto a heading of about 150. And I'll activate the approach. 8 miles, 180 knots. I'll probably start slowing down. Let's go 160 and go flaps 2. See how I can reduce my rate of descent now, because I can see I'm going to level off there. So I'm currently still showing 4 miles left, so we'll wait for about 2 miles and then we'll turn left and arm the approach. So we're still 3.3. Bahrain's over there. Right, so 160 knots, so here's about 2 miles. I'm going to go left heading 150. And I'm going to set... Now to arm the approach, you press approach here. That arms your localizer and your glide slope modes. And it says land 3 single. It means you can land Cat 3 approach single channel. Now, single channel because you've only got one autopilot on. Now you've got autopilot 1 and 2, gets you in dual channel mode. 7 miles, probably want to put the gear down. Now it gets really noisy. The lights on with the gear. And arm the spoilers. Okay. So we've got our GS armed, we've got our localizer armed. Our current altitude is going to be 2,500 feet. There's the runway. There's lock start. There's glide slope start. So I'll set 2,500 feet. That's our current altitude. 5 miles, 160 knots. Probably manage the speed. And our final flap will be flaps 3. So now that we're established, you can see it's slightly overshot the ILS there with that crosswind. I'm going to assume the cabin is ready. And we'll do the landing checklist. Landing checklist, all it says is confirm all of this. It's done. All right. Now we've got everything we need. Where's the... There we go. So, lock. So it's establishing itself slowly. It's a little bit wobbly. unusually.
1,000.
So then, how do you land an A350? See, we're approaching 500 feet now, and so 500 feet, power's come up. We are fully stable on this approach. We've got our go-around altitude set, we've got gear down, we've got flaps. The cabin, we're going to assume, is ready because they're not real. At this kind of weight, you want to be closing the thrust levers and raising the nose only by a couple of degrees at probably around 30 feet or so. Now, the manual says around 40, but I find with such a light aeroplane with a headwind, that's a bit ambitious and may lead to fairly heavy flybys. Once you get main gear touchdown, you want to be introducing some rudder and gently lowering the nose and selecting reverse. Idle reverse will be enough. See, it says land here. That means the auto land will work. But I'm going to try and do this one myself for you.
300.
Alright, approach 1.
Minimum.
Continue.
200.
Small corrections. Looking out of the window.
100.
So, looking at the end of the runway now.
40. 30. 20. 10. 5.
Alright, so there's reverse. And I've got spoilers, reverse green, BTV, and decel. Now normally, in the real airplane, it would actually select the A and F for you at this point. So that's Alpha 5 just passing on our right. I'm going to cancel the reverse. And disconnect the BTV. How do I disconnect the BTV? How do I disconnect the BTV? It's normally this button here. Okay. That'll work. Let's look up and vacate. Now, that's very, very, very noisy. So, please don't be in a rush to do anything after landing. Your main priority, yes, you've got a bunch of things that you'd like to do, but priority is to get off the runway safely and start navigating and going to the right place before you do. So our clearance is going to be to turn right onto runway 12 right. So we're going to go that way. So sharpish turn. So we want the speed to be no more than 10 knots, otherwise the nose wheel will skid. Okay, so when you are clear, what we're going to do, we're going to take the next left and then go and find a stand, because this terminal isn't quite correct. So then once you're clear, pilot flying will turn off that, we're off the runway, so strobes can go to auto. Then we will signal the start of the after landing procedure by disarming the spoilers. And then our pilot monitoring will clean up the flaps. You can zoom in here and use the A and F data if you want to. And now we just focus. That's all we do. Now we would obviously select the taxi camera if it's available, but it's clearly not available. I'm going to take the next left, so I want that ground speed below 10 knots. Yeah. There's a lot of very small aeroplanes that are in the way here, so I'm not sure where we're going to park. Okay. Maybe up by that 320, up where the DHL aeroplanes are. Or is there one there? Looks like Bahrain in the 70s. There's not enough space to park an A350 here today. It's helpful. How about there? No, that's not going to fit. Alright, let's say this is our park. Oh, it's taking me somewhere. Hold on, where are we going? I'm going to pretend that there aren't taxiway closure lights in the middle of this taxiway. Okay, so it's trying to take me onto there. That'll do. So we said it takes 1 minute and 15 seconds to start the APU, so this might be a good time. Let's do that. That's a pilot monitoring job, of course. There you go. There's a stand. I think the catering trucks and things might well be in the way, but we'll give it a go. The turn on to stand, ideally, again, can be done about 10 knots, but somewhere around 8. Let's try this guy. Alright. So, as you turn on to stand, you're confirming that it's clear. Not entirely sure that it is, so I'm going to go slightly left of the line because of that little twin and the catering truck and all sorts of stuff. Then, so that you don't blind the ground staff, you want to turn off the nose wheel light. And then you want to be doing about 2 knots turning on to stand for parking guidance to pick you up, but I guess here will do. Alright, so now that we've parked-ish, set the park brake. Then a minute. Why are we only flaps 2? Okay, the flaps should be up. As I say, it takes 1 minute and 15 seconds for the APU to become available, and you need 5 minutes after landing. Now there is a way. In this menu on the aeroplane, there is a report of takeoff and landing times and things. So that's what you do. So you've got the park brake on, you put the bleed on, and the reason for that is in case of a tailpipe fire, you need some pressure to be able to turn and crank the fuel away from the engine. Tailpipe fires are very, very rare. But once we have that, please make sure that you have the APU available before you do this next bit. We can shut the engines down. 1, 2. We want to confirm, having made the PA to the cabin crew during the stand, that they have disarmed all of the slides, which they haven't because I didn't make that PA. How do I make them do that? Toggle slide arming. There we go. Slides are disarmed. Now when these are about below 10%, so the engines have spooled down, turn off the beacon. That signals to the ground crew that it's safe to approach the aeroplane. Turn off the fuel pumps. Then we can turn off the transponder. And we're happy that nobody's got a slide still armed and the engines are down. We can turn off the seatbelt sign and let the passengers know that it's safe to jump up. Not that they haven't jumped up already and started grabbing their bags. And the last thing we'll do is the parking checklist. Parking checklist says the park brake or chocks. Well, at this point in time, we know that the park brake is on. The chocks we won't know until the ground crew contact us. And it says wing lights, but what it means is the lights on the wing. The landing light on and the nose wheel lights are off. The wing lights don't tend to use them anyway, but they're also off. So it just means that the lights are off. And that's the parking checklist complete. That is a full sector of how to fly an A350 from one destination to another. And so, after a flawless descent, a textbook landing, and only mild panic when the coffee ran low, Emirates 839 arrived safely in Bahrain. Another successful day in the flight deck, where hours of calm professionalism are occasionally interrupted by the thrilling need to push a button. If you enjoyed this glimpse behind the curtain into a world of checklists, charts, and cultivated nonchalance, feel free to like, subscribe, or just nod silently. I'm James, captain, instructor, and full-time autopilot babysitter, and I'll see you next time for another look at what it really takes to fly these magnificent machines. Spoiler, still not Top Gun.